The red F on my report card burned through the paper like a brand. I stared at it in the hallway outside Mrs. Patterson's classroom, my hands trembling so badly the card shook. Around me, other students rushed past, laughing and chattering about summer plans, completely unaware that my entire future had just been stolen. I had earned an A in that class. I knew I had. I'd aced every test, completed every assignment, participated in every discussion. I'd stayed after school for extra help I didn't need, just to prove I was serious. I'd done everything right. And Mrs. Alina Patterson had failed me anyway. There must be a mistake, I whispered to myself, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew there was no mistake. This was deliberate. This was calculated. This was the final move in a year-long chess game I hadn't even realized I was playing. I looked up to see Mrs. Patterson standing in her doorway, watching me with those cold blue eyes that had tracked my every move since September. She wasn't smiling. She never smiled at me, but there was something satisfied in her expression, something victorious. "Is there a problem, Maya?" she asked, her voice carrying that syrupy southern sweetness that fooled everyone except the students who knew better. "This grade," I managed. "I earned an A in your class. I have all my tests, all my papers." "Your grade reflects your performance, dear. Perhaps if you'd applied yourself more seriously, the outcome would have been different." Applied myself. I had the highest test scores in the class. Mrs. Patterson's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Grades are about more than test scores, Maya. They're about attitude, effort, classroom citizenship, areas where you've consistently fallen short." "That's not true. I've never been disrespectful, never missed an assignment, never." "This conversation is over." She stepped back into her classroom. "I suggest you accept responsibility for your failures instead of making excuses. That's a lesson that will serve you well in life." The door closed in my face. I stood there, staring at the wood grain, feeling something crack open inside my chest. Not just disappointment or anger, though both were there in abundance. Something deeper. The fracturing of a belief I'd held my entire 16 years, that if I worked hard enough, if I was good enough, the world would be fair. It wouldn't. It wasn't. And Mrs. Alina Patterson had just taught me the most valuable lesson I'd ever learn. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back to the girl I was before I understood what it meant to have your future in the hands of someone who'd already decided you didn't deserve one. My name is Maya Elise Richardson, and I grew up in Pemberton, Mississippi, a small town where everybody knew everybody, where church on Sunday was mandatory and gossip traveled faster than summer lightning, and where the invisible lines between black and white had been drawn so long ago that most people pretended they didn't exist anymore. My father, James Richardson, was a mechanic who could fix anything with an engine and quote Shakespeare while he did it. My mother, Lorraine, taught 3rd grade at the elementary school across town, the one in the black neighborhood, though nobody called it that out loud. Together, they'd raised me and my 2 brothers in a small yellow house with a wraparound porch and a garden that was my mother's pride and joy. "Education is the one thing they can't take from you," my mother said at least once a week, usually while checking our homework with the intensity of a surgeon examining x-rays. "You get your education, Maya, and you can go anywhere, be anything." I believed her. I was hungry for it, knowledge, achievement, the golden ticket out of Pemberton to something bigger. By the time I reached Jefferson Davis High School, I had the highest GPA in my class, a collection of academic awards that filled an entire shelf in our living room, and dreams of becoming a doctor that felt as real and solid as the ground beneath my feet. Junior year was supposed to be the most important. The year that would determine my college options, my scholarship potential, my entire future trajectory. And the most important class of junior year was AP American History, a rigorous course that colleges paid attention to, taught by the legendary Mrs. Alina Patterson. Legendary for her difficulty. Legendary for her high standards. Legendary for producing students who went on to Ivy League schools and distinguished careers. What nobody talked about, at least not where white people could hear, was that in 23 years of teaching, Mrs. Patterson had never given a black student higher than a C. I didn't know that statistic when I walked into her classroom on the first day of junior year. I only knew that I belonged there, that I'd earned my place through test scores and teacher recommendations and an academic record that spoke for itself. Mrs. Patterson was a small woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair always pulled back in a severe bun and reading glasses that she peered over with an expression of perpetual dissatisfaction. Her classroom was immaculate. American flags and presidential portraits and framed copies of the Constitution arranged with military precision. "This is an advanced placement course," she announced on that first day, scanning the room with those sharp blue eyes. "The standards are high, the workload is intense. Many of you will find yourselves struggling to keep up." Her gaze landed on me, the only black face in a sea of white ones, and lingered just a moment too long. "If you don't believe you can handle the rigor, I encourage you to transfer to a standard history section. There's no shame in knowing your limitations." A few students glanced in my direction. I felt my face grow hot, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd dealt with moments like this before. Small slights, subtle implications. I knew how to swallow them and keep moving. What I didn't know was that this was just the beginning. That Mrs. Alina Patterson had looked at me on that first day and made a decision. That no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, she had already determined my grade. She had determined my failure. The first few weeks, I told myself I was imagining things. When Mrs. Patterson called on every student in our row except me, I assumed she simply hadn't noticed my raised hand. When she returned my first essay with a C- and vague comments about lacking analytical depth, I assumed I needed to work harder. When she praised a white classmate's response that was nearly identical to one I'd given moments earlier, I assumed I hadn't articulated my point clearly enough. I was conditioned to assume the problem was me. That's what good students do. We internalize, we adjust, we try harder. We never consider that the game might be rigged. But the evidence kept mounting. My second S, a 15-page analysis of the Constitutional Convention that I'd spent 3 weeks researching, came back with a D. The comments were contradictory and confusing. Lacks originality, written next to passages that synthesized sources in ways I'd never seen anyone else attempt. Unsupported claims, next to sentences with 4 footnotes. I requested a meeting with Mrs. Patterson to discuss how I could improve. "Maya, I'm concerned about your ability to handle the demands of this course," she said, not looking up from the papers on her desk. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a less challenging environment." "I want to be here," I said firmly. "I just want to understand what I'm doing wrong so I can fix it." She finally looked at me, and something flickered in her expression, annoyance, perhaps, that I wasn't taking the hint. "Some students simply aren't cut out for advanced academics, no matter how much they wish otherwise. That's not a character flaw, it's just reality." She removed her glasses and cleaned them with a small cloth. "I've been teaching for 23 years. I can recognize potential when I see it, and I can recognize its absence." The words hit me like a slap, but I refused to let her see me flinch. "What specifically can I do to improve my essays?" I pressed. "If you could point to concrete examples." "I've given you my feedback. Whether you choose to accept it is up to you." She replaced her glasses and returned to her papers. "Close the door on your way out." That night, I sat at our kitchen table with my essay spread before me, trying to decode what I'd done wrong. My mother found me there at midnight, red-eyed and frustrated. "Baby, what's going on?" I showed her the essay. She read it slowly, her teacher's eye scanning every sentence. When she finished, her expression was troubled. "Maya, this is excellent work. The thesis is clear, the arguments are well supported, the writing is sophisticated." She looked at the D written in red at the top. "I don't understand this grade." "Neither do I," she says. "I lack analytical depth. But look," I pointed to a passage. "That's 3 different sources synthesized into an original interpretation. That's the definition of analytical depth." My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked a question that changed everything. "Baby, Are there other black students in this class? No, I'm the only one. And how does she treat you compared to the white students? Be honest. I opened my mouth to say the same, but the lie wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself recounting every small slight, every strange look, every moment of being overlooked or dismissed. As I spoke, I watched my mother's face shift from concern to something harder, something that looked like recognition. Mama, what is it? She took my hands in hers. I was hoping it would be different for you, hoping that by now things had changed. She shook her head slowly. Some people look at us and see potential. Others look at us and see a threat. They'll do everything they can to put us back in the place they think we belong. So what do? Drop the class? Let her win? No, my mother's voice was fierce. You don't drop anything. You don't give her that satisfaction, but you do start protecting yourself. She stood and retrieved a notebook from her bag. From now on, you document everything. Every assignment, every grade, every interaction. You keep copies of all your work. You build a record. A record for what? For whatever comes next. Because, baby, I've seen teachers like this before. They don't stop until they've accomplished what they set out to do. And if you're going to fight back, you need evidence. I took my mother's advice to heart. I created a system, meticulous, detailed, obsessive. Every essay I submitted, I kept a copy with a timestamp. Every test I took, I photographed my answers before turning it in. Every comment Mrs. Patterson made in class, I wrote down with the date and time and names of students who witnessed it. I also started paying attention to patterns. My test scores were consistently among the highest in the class when graded by Scantron machines that couldn't see my name or skin color. But subjective assignments, essays, presentations, participation grades were where my marks plummeted. I compared my essays to those of my white classmates. Jennifer Holloway, who sat next to me, was kind enough to share her work when I asked. We had similar writing styles, similar levels of research, similar analytical approaches. Jennifer consistently received A's. I began documenting those comparisons too, side by side, with grades highlighted, building my case without even knowing what case I was building. But even as I gathered evidence, my grade continued to sink. Mrs. Patterson seemed determined to ensure I failed, and nothing I did could stop the slow-motion destruction of my academic future. Midterms came back, D+. My mother requested a meeting with Mrs. Patterson and the principal. Mrs. Patterson provided smooth explanations about my attitude problems and difficulty accepting feedback. The principal nodded along sympathetically. Nothing changed. By spring, I was barely maintaining a D in the class, a D that would destroy my GPA, eliminate my chance at valedictorian, and jeopardize the college scholarships I desperately needed. And then came the final research paper, 25% of our total grade, my last chance to salvage something from the wreckage. I poured everything into that paper, 3 months of research, 40 pages of analysis, 200 footnotes from primary and secondary sources, a thesis so original that even my mother, who'd read thousands of student essays, said she'd never seen anything like it. I turned it in on a Friday afternoon, my hands shaking with hope and fear. When I got it back the following week, there was no grade written on it, just a single note in Mrs. Patterson's spidery handwriting. See me after class. I waited until every other student had filed out of the classroom before approaching Mrs. Patterson's desk. She sat there with my paper in front of her, her fingers resting lightly on the pages I'd poured my soul into. Close the door, Maya. I did as she asked, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I've been teaching AP history for 23 years, she began, not looking at me. In that time, I've developed an instinct for recognizing when work is authentic and when it's not. My blood ran cold. What are you saying? I'm saying that this paper, she tapped the stack of pages, is clearly beyond your capabilities. The research is too sophisticated. The analysis is too advanced. The writing style is inconsistent with your previous work. That's because my previous work was graded unfairly, I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to control it. This paper reflects my actual abilities. Mrs. Patterson finally looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen directed at me before. Not just disdain or dismissal, but genuine hatred. "I'm recommending that you be brought before the Academic Integrity Committee for plagiarism," she said calmly. "Given the severity of the offense, you'll likely face suspension and a permanent mark on your transcript. I doubt any respectable college will consider your application after that." The room spun. I gripped the edge of her desk to steady myself. "I didn't plagiarize. I wrote every word of that paper myself. I have drafts, notes, research logs. Fabricated, I'm sure, to cover your tracks." She stood, gathering my paper into a folder. "The meeting is scheduled for next Thursday at 3 p.m. I suggest you bring your parents and prepare yourself for the consequences." "You can't do this," I whispered. "You can't just accuse me without evidence." "The evidence is the paper itself, Maya. It's simply too good for someone like you to have written." "Someone like you." The words hung in the air, finally spoken aloud after a year of implications and insinuations. She'd said it. She'd actually said it. "Someone like me," I repeated slowly. "What exactly do you mean by that?" For a split second, Mrs. Patterson's composure faltered. She knew she'd made a mistake, but she recovered quickly, her face smoothing into practiced neutrality. "Someone with your academic history in this class, nothing more." "My academic history that you created, my grades that don't match my test scores, my essays that suddenly became substandard the moment you started grading them." I straightened my spine, feeling something shift inside me. "I know what you're doing, Mrs. Patterson. I've known for months, and I have documentation of everything." "I'm sure you think you do," she smiled thinly. "But it's your word against mine, dear, and in this town we both know whose word carries more weight." She walked past me toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "Thursday at 3 p.m. Don't be late." I drove straight home, my whole body vibrating with shock and rage and terror. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I could barely see through my tears. My mother was in the garden when I stumbled out of the car. One look at my face, and she dropped her trowel, crossing the yard in seconds. "Maya, baby, what happened?" I couldn't speak. I just handed her the folder I'd been clutching, the copies of all my documentation, the evidence I'd been building for months, the record that my mother had told me to keep. She led me inside, sat me at the kitchen table with a glass of water, and read through everything while I tried to control my breathing. When she finished, her face was set in an expression I'd never seen before. "She accused you of plagiarism." I nodded. "She said this paper was too good for someone like you." Another nod. My mother closed the folder gently. Then she picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. "Jerome, it's Lorraine Richardson. I need you to come to the house tonight. Bring your briefcase." She paused. "It's Maya. That teacher I told you about, she's trying to destroy my baby, and we're going to stop her." Jerome Washington was my uncle, my mother's brother, a civil rights attorney who'd spent the last 20 years fighting discrimination cases across the Deep South. He arrived that evening with a leather briefcase and an expression of quiet fury that intensified as he reviewed my documentation. "You did exactly the right thing, Maya," he said finally. "This is remarkable. Dates, times, witnesses, copies of your work alongside comparable work from white students." He looked up at me with something like pride. "You built a case without even knowing you were building one." "Can we use it?" my father asked. He'd been silent since I'd told him what happened, his jaw clenched tight, his hands gripping the table edge. "We can, but we need to be strategic." Uncle Jerome leaned forward. "This Academic Integrity Committee meeting, who presides over it?" "The principal, Mr. Hartley," I said, "and the superintendent usually attends for AP violations." "Good, we're going to request a delay while we prepare our response. And Maya," he fixed me with a serious look, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Anything." "Did you write that paper yourself? Every word, every idea, every footnote?" "Yes, I swear to God, Uncle Jerome. I spent 3 months on it. I have the original drafts on my computer, dated. I have handwritten notes from my research. I have library checkout receipts for the books I used. I can show you the exact evolution of my thesis from the first idea to the final version." A slow smile spread across his face. Then Mrs. Alina Patterson just made the biggest mistake of her career, because she didn't just fail a student unfairly. She put her accusation in writing. She initiated formal proceedings. She created a paper trail that leads directly to her own misconduct. What does that mean? It means she gave us the opportunity to expose everything, not in whispered conversations or unofficial complaints that can be swept under the rug, in a formal hearing, on the record, in front of witnesses. He placed his hand over mine. "Maya, I know this feels like the end of the world, but I promise you, this is just the beginning." The next week was a whirlwind of preparation. Uncle Jerome requested a 2-week delay for the academic integrity hearing, citing the need for adequate time to prepare a response to serious allegations with lifelong consequences. The superintendent, perhaps sensing the potential for complications, granted the extension without argument. Meanwhile, our kitchen became a war room. Every evening, Uncle Jerome arrived with new research, new strategies, new questions. We organized my documentation into a timeline that painted an undeniable picture. A pattern of discrimination stretching from September to June, systematic in its execution, devastating in its effects. But documentation alone wasn't enough. We needed witnesses. "The other students in your class," Uncle Jerome said one evening. "Who among them might be willing to corroborate what you experienced?" I thought carefully. Most of my classmates had been, at best, indifferent to my situation. At worst, they'd absorbed Mrs. Patterson's subtle signals and begun treating me as an outsider, someone who didn't quite belong in their advanced circle. But there was one person who'd always been kind. "Jennifer Holloway," I said. "She sits next to me. She shared her essays with me so I could compare our grades. She's seen how differently Mrs. Patterson treats me." "Do you trust her?" "I think so. She's never been cruel, and she seems uncomfortable sometimes with how things are." Uncle Jerome nodded. "Approach her carefully. Don't ask her to lie or exaggerate. Just ask if she'd be willing to share what she's observed. The truth is enough if people are brave enough to tell it." I found Jennifer in the library the next afternoon, studying alone at a corner table. When she saw me approaching, something flickered across her face, nervousness, maybe, or guilt. "Maya, hi." She glanced around as if checking who might see us together. "How are you doing? I heard about. I mean, everyone's talking about the plagiarism accusation." She nodded, her cheeks flushing. "It's ridiculous. Anyone who's sat next to you all year knows you work harder than anyone in that class." "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about." I sat down across from her, keeping my voice low. "Jennifer, you've seen things this year. The way Mrs. Patterson treats me differently. The way my grades don't match the quality of my work. The comments she makes." Jennifer's eyes dropped to the table. "Maya, I don't want to get involved in." "I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm just asking if you'd be willing to tell the truth, at the hearing, about what you've witnessed." She was quiet for a long moment. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "My parents would kill me. My father plays golf with Principal Hartley. My mother is in the same garden club as Mrs. Patterson. If I speak against her, I'll be." "I understand." I stood to leave, swallowing my disappointment. "It's okay, Jennifer. I know it's a lot to ask." "Maya, wait." I turned back. Jennifer was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "What she's doing to you is wrong. I've known it all year, and I've said nothing, and I hate myself for it." She took a shaky breath. "My grandmother, my mom's mother, she marched with Dr. King in the 60s. She used to tell me stories about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." She met my eyes, and I saw something strengthen in her expression. "I'll do it. I'll testify, whatever you need." Jennifer wasn't the only one. Once word spread, carefully, quietly, through networks of students who trusted each other, others began to come forward. Marcus Chen, who'd transferred out of Mrs. Patterson's class the previous year after she'd made repeated comments about his limited English, despite him being born in Alabama. Destiny Williams, a senior who'd taken the class 3 years ago and received a C despite perfect test scores. Thomas Martinez, who'd witnessed Mrs. Patterson tear up a Latina student's essay in front of the entire class, calling it barely literate. Each story was different. Each story was the same. A pattern of behavior spanning years, targeting students of color with surgical precision while maintaining a veneer of professionalism that fooled administrators and parents alike. "This is bigger than just you, Maya," Uncle Jerome said as he reviewed the growing stack of testimonies. "This is systemic. This woman has been destroying students' futures for over 2 decades, and no one has ever held her accountable." "Why not?" I asked. "Why hasn't anyone stopped her before?" My mother answered, her voice heavy with the weight of history. "Because the students she targets don't have power. Their families don't have connections. They don't have the resources to fight back. They just disappear, move on, try to recover from what she did to them." "But I have you," I said quietly. "I have Uncle Jerome. I have documentation." "You have more than that, baby." My mother took my hand. "You have courage, the courage to say no more. That's not something everyone has. It's a gift." The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my bedroom window, looking out at the quiet street where I'd grown up, the neighborhood that had shaped me, the town that contained both the people who loved me and the systems that tried to break me. Tomorrow, everything would change. Either Mrs. Patterson's accusations would stick and my future would be destroyed, or the truth would finally come out and nothing would ever be the same again. My phone buzzed, a text from Jennifer. "I'm scared, but I'm ready. See you tomorrow. We've got this." Another text from Marcus. "My parents tried to talk me out of testifying. I told them some things are more important than being comfortable. See you there." And another from Destiny. "I've waited 3 years for this moment. Tomorrow, we take our power back." I read those messages over and over, feeling something swell in my chest. Not just hope, something bigger. A sense of being part of something larger than myself. A movement of students who'd been silenced finding their voices together. Mrs. Patterson had tried to destroy me alone. She didn't realize she was waking up an army. The hearing was held in the Jefferson Davis High School library, a location chosen for its neutrality and size. By the time I arrived with my parents and Uncle Jerome, every seat was filled. I hadn't expected an audience, but word had spread through the community. Black families who'd heard whispers about what was happening, white allies who wanted to witness the proceedings, former students who'd traveled from as far as Memphis and New Orleans to be present. Even local journalists hovered near the entrance, their notepads ready. Mrs. Patterson sat at a table near the front, flanked by her husband, a local businessman, and her own attorney, a sharp-faced man I didn't recognize. She looked calm, confident, utterly certain that this was a formality she would easily survive. Principal Hartley called the meeting to order. Beside him sat Superintendent Margaret Dawson, a stern woman I'd never spoken to, and 3 school board members who would serve as the deciding panel. "We're here today to address allegations of academic dishonesty against Maya Richardson, a junior in Mrs. Patterson's AP American History class," Principal Hartley began. "Mrs. Patterson, please present your case." She stood with practiced poise, smoothing her skirt before speaking. "Thank you, Principal Hartley. This is a difficult situation, but one that demands integrity. Over the past year, I've watched Maya Richardson struggle to meet the standards of my course. Her essay work has been consistently subpar, poorly researched, lacking analytical depth, frankly unsuitable for an advanced placement student." She held up my research paper, the 40 pages I'd poured my heart into. And then she submits this, a paper so dramatically different in quality from her previous work that the only reasonable explanation is plagiarism. The research is too sophisticated. The writing is too polished. It simply doesn't match her demonstrated abilities. She set the paper down with a dismissive gesture. "I've been teaching for 23 years. I know when a student has cheated, and Maya Richardson cheated. The room was silent. I felt the weight of dozens of eyes on me, some sympathetic, others skeptical, waiting to see if I could defend myself against this woman's authority. Uncle Jerome rose. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I'd like to respond on behalf of my niece." He opened his briefcase, withdrawing a thick folder. "But first, I'd like to establish some context." He approached the panel's table, laying out documents with methodical precision. "This is Maya Richardson's academic record from kindergarten through her current junior year. Straight A's in every subject, standardized test scores in the 99th percentile, National Honor Society, science fair winner, literary magazine editor." He paused, letting the information sink in. "This is not a struggling student. This is one of the most academically gifted young people in this county's history." Mrs. Patterson's attorney stood. "Objection. Past performance doesn't prove she didn't cheat on this particular assignment." "I'm not finished," Uncle Jerome said calmly. "I'm establishing that Mrs. Patterson's characterization of my niece as someone who struggles to meet standards is demonstrably false. Now, let me show you how we know that." He withdrew another set of documents. "These are Maya's test scores in Mrs. Patterson's class, specifically the tests graded by Scantron machines rather than by Mrs. Patterson herself. Maya scored above 95% on every single one, the highest scores in the class." Murmurs rippled through the audience. "Now, these are her essay grades, assignments graded subjectively by Mrs. Patterson." He laid out paper after paper. D-, C-, D+, a pattern of failure on every assignment where Mrs. Patterson had sole discretion over the grade. He turned to face the panel directly. "Does that seem consistent to you? A student who demonstrates mastery on objective tests, but somehow can't write a coherent essay? Or does it seem more consistent with a teacher who is deliberately undermining a student's grade?" Mrs. Patterson's attorney jumped up. "This is outrageous. You're accusing a respected educator of—" "I'm not finished," Uncle Jerome repeated, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now. "Let me show you what else we've documented." He produced another folder. "These are essays written by Maya alongside essays written by her classmate Jennifer Holloway. Similar length, similar structure, similar analytical approach. Jennifer received A's, Maya received D's. Would the panel like to review them side by side?" He laid the essays before Superintendent Dawson, who studied them with a deepening frown. "Now, I'd like to address the plagiarism accusation directly." Uncle Jerome withdrew a flash drive. "This contains the complete digital record of Maya's research paper, every draft, every revision, every note, all with metadata showing dates and times of creation. The first draft was begun 3 months before the paper was due. The thesis evolved over 17 separate revisions. The research notes fill over 100 pages." He handed the flash drive to Principal Hartley. "No plagiarist creates this kind of trail. This is the work of a dedicated student who spent 3 months crafting an exceptional paper, a paper that Mrs. Patterson dismissed as too good for Maya to have written." He turned to face Mrs. Patterson directly. "Those were your exact words, weren't they, Mrs. Patterson? That this paper was too good for someone like her. That someone like her couldn't have produced work of this quality." The room went absolutely still. Mrs. Patterson's face had gone pale. Her attorney whispered urgently in her ear. "I'd like to call my first witness," Uncle Jerome continued. "Jennifer Holloway." Jennifer rose from her seat in the audience, her hands trembling but her jaw set. She approached the front of the room and sat in the witness chair. "Jennifer, you've sat next to Maya in Mrs. Patterson's class all year. Please tell the panel what you've observed." Jennifer took a deep breath. "I've watched Mrs. Patterson ignore Maya's raised hand while calling on everyone else. I've seen her grade Maya's essays differently than mine, even when they were similar quality. I've heard her make comments, subtle things, but we all noticed, about Maya not belonging in the class." She looked at Mrs. Patterson. "I should have said something sooner. We all should have, but we were afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of what's happening right now, of being targeted, of having her turn on us. Jennifer's voice strengthened. But what's happening to Maya isn't right, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. Uncle Jerome nodded. Thank you, Jennifer. I have 6 more witnesses who would like to share similar observations, some from this year, some from previous years. Former students who experienced the same pattern of discrimination. If the panel will permit, I'd like to call them now. Superintendent Dawson leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Call them. One by one, they came forward. Marcus Chen, now a pre-law student at Vanderbilt, described how Mrs. Patterson had mocked his pronunciation of constitutional in front of the entire class, suggesting that perhaps the language barrier was affecting his academic performance. He was third-generation American. English was his only language. Destiny Williams, now working as a paralegal in Atlanta, recounted receiving a C in AP History despite earning the highest score in the class on the AP exam itself. A score of 5, perfect, achieved despite the D that Mrs. Patterson had given her as a final grade. The discrepancy had cost her a full scholarship to Spelman. Thomas Martinez described watching Mrs. Patterson tear up his cousin's essay, calling it barely literate in front of 30 students. His cousin had dropped out of school 3 weeks later and never returned. A woman named Patricia Okonkwo, now a professor of African American Studies at Duke University, traveled from North Carolina to testify. She'd been in Mrs. Patterson's class in 1987, over 30 years ago, and her story was hauntingly similar to mine. She told me I had reached my ceiling, Dr. Okonkwo said quietly, that I should consider vocational training instead of college. I was 16 years old with dreams of becoming a scholar. She nearly killed those dreams. But you became a professor anyway, Uncle Jerome said. I did, but it took me years to believe I was capable, years to undo the damage she inflicted on my confidence, my sense of self-worth. Dr. Okonkwo looked at me across the room. What she's doing to Maya, she did to me. She did to countless others. The only difference is that Maya had the courage and the resources to fight back. With each testimony, I watched the panel's expressions shift. Principal Hartley, who'd always seemed dismissive of my concerns, was now visibly uncomfortable. Superintendent Dawson was taking copious notes, her pen moving furiously across her legal pad. The school board members exchanged troubled glances. And Mrs. Patterson, the woman who'd held my future in her hands with such casual cruelty, was shrinking before my eyes. Her composure cracked with each new witness, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been fear. After the 6th witness, Uncle Jerome paused. I have one final piece of evidence to present, he said, withdrawing a document from his briefcase. This is a statistical analysis of Mrs. Patterson's grading patterns over the past 15 years, compiled from school records obtained through a public information request. He handed copies to the panel. In 23 years of teaching AP history, Mrs. Patterson has taught approximately 2,000 students. Of those, roughly 200 have been students of color, Black, Latino, Asian, and Indigenous students. He paused, letting the numbers settle. Not a single one of those 200 students has received higher than a C in her class. Not one. Gasps rippled through the audience. Meanwhile, white students with comparable test scores and academic records consistently received A's and B's. The statistical probability of this occurring by chance is less than 1 in 10 million. He turned to face Mrs. Patterson directly. This isn't unconscious bias, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't a difference in teaching styles or grading philosophies. This is systematic, intentional discrimination against students of color. And it has been happening in this school, under the supervision of this administration, for over 2 decades. Mrs. Patterson's attorney rose, his face flushed. This is a witch hunt. You're taking isolated incidents and... Isolated? Uncle Jerome's voice was sharp. I have 6 witnesses here today and statements from 12 more who couldn't attend. I have 15 years of grading data. I have a paper trail of complaints that were filed and ignored, concerns that were raised and dismissed. He looked at Principal Hartley. Complaints that were brought to this very administration and buried. Hartley's face went white. This isn't about Maya Richardson anymore, Uncle Jerome continued. This is about a system that protected a racist teacher at the expense of generations of students whose grades were sabotaged, whose confidence was destroyed, whose futures were derailed. He turned to the panel. The question before you isn't whether Maya plagiarized. We've proven beyond any doubt that she didn't. The question is what you're going to do about the real crime that's been committed here. The room was silent for a long moment after Uncle Jerome finished. Then Mrs. Patterson stood. May I speak? Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it, stripped of its usual authority. Superintendent Dawson nodded. Mrs. Patterson looked around the room, at the witnesses who'd accused her, at the community members who'd come to watch, at me, sitting straight-backed between my parents. I have given my life to education, she began. 23 years of service to this school, to this community. I have high standards because I believe in excellence. If certain students haven't met those standards, it's not because of their race, it's because they didn't do the work. Mrs. Patterson, Superintendent Dawson interrupted, we have documented evidence that Maya Richardson's test scores were among the highest in your class. We have side-by-side essay comparisons showing identical quality receiving drastically different grades. We have 15 years of statistics showing a clear racial pattern. How do you explain that? Mrs. Patterson faltered. Teaching is subjective. Different students have different strengths and weaknesses. I can't be expected to. 23 years, Superintendent Dawson cut in. Not a single student of color above a C. You're telling me that in 23 years, you never encountered a single Black or Latino or Asian student capable of earning a B in your class. The silence stretched. I've always graded fairly, Mrs. Patterson said finally, but her voice had lost all conviction. The evidence suggests otherwise. Superintendent Dawson turned to the panel. I've seen enough. I move that we dismiss the plagiarism charges against Maya Richardson immediately and open a formal investigation into Mrs. Patterson's conduct. Seconded, said one of the school board members. All in favor. 3 hands raised. The motion carries. Maya Richardson, you are cleared of all charges. Your grade in AP History will be recalculated by an independent review panel. Superintendent Dawson looked at Mrs. Patterson with something approaching disgust. Mrs. Patterson, you are suspended with pay pending a full investigation. Please surrender your classroom keys to Principal Hartley before leaving the building. For a moment, Mrs. Patterson didn't move. Then, slowly, she reached into her purse, withdrew a ring of keys and placed them on the table. She walked out without looking at anyone, her husband trailing behind her. The room erupted. The moments after the hearing were a blur of embraces and tears and flashing cameras. My mother held me so tightly I could barely breathe, her body shaking with sobs she'd held back for months. My father stood beside us, his hand on my shoulder, tears streaming down his face, the first time I'd ever seen him cry. Uncle Jerome was surrounded by reporters, his calm voice explaining the significance of what had just happened. But the moment I remember most clearly was when Dr. Patricia Okonkwo found me in the crowd. She took both my hands in hers, her eyes bright with tears and something else, recognition, perhaps, or hope. You did something today that I couldn't do 30 years ago, she said quietly. You stood up and said no more. Do you understand what that means? I shook my head, still too overwhelmed to fully process what had happened. It means every student who comes after you, every Black child, every brown child, every child who doesn't fit the mold, they'll walk into that school knowing that discrimination has consequences, that someone fought for them before they even arrived. She squeezed my hands. You didn't just win your case, Maya. You changed the future. The investigation that followed was thorough and damning. Over the next 3 months, the school board conducted a comprehensive review of Mrs. Patterson's tenure at Jefferson Davis High School. They interviewed over 100 former students. They analyzed decades of grading records. They examined complaint files that had been buried in administrative storage for years. What they found was even worse than we'd imagined. Mrs. Patterson had received 17 formal complaints about discriminatory behavior over her 23-year career. Each one had been dismissed, downplayed, or quietly settled without any change to her status. Principals had come and gone, but Mrs. Patterson remained, protected by tenure, by connections, by a community that didn't want to believe one of its most respected educators was capable of such cruelty. The final report ran over 200 pages. Its conclusions were unequivocal. Mrs. Alina Patterson had engaged in a systematic pattern of racial discrimination that had negatively impacted the academic careers and emotional well-being of at least 87 documented students. 87, and those were just the ones they could verify. The real number was almost certainly higher. The school board voted unanimously to terminate her employment. Her teaching license was revoked by the state of Mississippi. The teachers' union, initially prepared to defend her, withdrew its support after seeing the evidence. Mrs. Patterson and her husband left Pemberton 3 weeks later. I heard they moved to Florida, where no one knew their names or their history. I hoped she would spend the rest of her days haunted by the faces of the students she'd tried to destroy. But I didn't waste much time thinking about her. I had a future to build. The independent review panel recalculated my grade based on my test scores, my documentation, and a fresh evaluation of my essays by 3 university professors who had no connection to Pemberton or Mrs. Patterson. They gave me an A+. With my GPA restored, I reclaimed my position as valedictorian of my class. The scholarship offers that had dried up during the plagiarism accusation came flooding back, and now there were more of them, from more prestigious institutions, accompanied by personal letters praising my courage and resilience. I chose Howard University, a historically Black institution where I knew I would be surrounded by excellence, by community, by people who understood my journey without needing it explained. My graduation speech was covered by local news, then picked up by national outlets. A 16-year-old Black girl who'd taken on a racist teacher and won. It was the kind of story that resonated in a country still grappling with its history of discrimination. I stood at that podium in my cap and gown, looking out at the faces of my classmates, my family, my community, and I spoke from the heart. They told me I didn't belong in that classroom. They told me my success was impossible, my dreams were unrealistic, my voice was unwelcome. They tried to fail me not because of what I did, but because of who I am. I paused, finding my mother's tear-streaked face in the crowd. But I'm standing here today as proof that their verdict was never final, that the limitations they placed on me were never my truth, that every time they pushed me down, I had a choice, to stay down or to rise. I straightened my shoulders. To every student who's ever been told you're not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough, I want you to hear me. Their opinion of you is not your destiny. Their prejudice is not your prison. You have the power to prove them wrong, to outlast them, to outshine them. And when you do, you won't just be winning for yourself. You'll be lighting the way for everyone who comes after you. The applause was thunderous, but I wasn't done. I also want to thank the people who supported me when it would have been easier to stay silent. Jennifer Holloway, Marcus Chen, Destiny Williams, and all the others who came forward at the hearing. It takes courage to stand up for what's right, especially when there's a cost. You showed me that I wasn't alone. That truth still matters. That good people will rise when they're needed most. I looked directly at Jennifer, who was crying in the 3rd row. We did this together, and together we changed something. Maybe not everything, there's still so much work to do, but something. And that matters. The summer before college was a whirlwind of interviews and speaking requests. I was invited to share my story at education conferences, civil rights forums, youth leadership summits. Each time I spoke, I met more students with similar experiences. Bright, talented young people who'd been undermined by teachers or administrators or systems that didn't value them. Their stories broke my heart, but their resilience gave me hope. "You've become something of a symbol," Uncle Jerome told me one evening as we sat on my grandmother's porch watching the sunset. A reminder that accountability is possible, even when the odds seem impossible. I don't want to be a symbol, I admitted. I just wanted to go to college and become a doctor. You can still do that, but Maya, he turned to face me. What happened to you wasn't just about you. It was about a system that failed generations of students. By speaking up, by documenting everything, by refusing to be silenced, you exposed something that needed to be exposed. That's not a burden. It's a gift. It doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like a weight. Maybe both things can be true, he smiled gently. The question is what you do with it. You can set it down and walk away, no one would blame you. Or you can carry it forward, use it to help others, let it fuel something bigger than yourself. I thought about Dr. Okonkwo, who'd taken her pain and transformed it into a career of scholarship and advocacy. I thought about Destiny Williams, who was now studying law specifically because of what she'd experienced. I thought about all the students I'd met who were finding their voices because they'd heard mine. I want to be a doctor, I said slowly, but I also want to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Is it possible to do both? Uncle Jerome laughed. Baby girl, you just took down a 23-year institution of discrimination while maintaining a 4 GPA. I think you can do whatever you set your mind to. 15 years have passed since that hearing in the Jefferson Davis High School library. I'm sitting now in my office at Johns Hopkins Hospital, where my nameplate reads Dr. Maya Richardson, Chief of Pediatric Surgery. Outside my window, Baltimore stretches toward the horizon, a city far from the small Mississippi town where my story began, but never far from my heart. The journey from that courtroom to this corner office was not a straight line. It was winding, challenging, sometimes brutal. But every obstacle I faced after Mrs. Patterson felt manageable by comparison. After all, I'd already survived the worst thing I could imagine. Everything else was just a test I'd been trained to pass. Howard University became my sanctuary, a place where excellence was expected, where my blackness was celebrated rather than questioned, where I could heal from wounds I hadn't fully realized I was carrying. I majored in biology, minored in African American studies, and graduated summa cum laude before heading to Harvard Medical School. Yes, Harvard. The girl who was accused of being incapable of writing a sophisticated research paper earned her MD from one of the most prestigious medical schools in the world. I wish Mrs. Patterson could see me now. Actually, that's not quite true. I stopped needing her to see me a long time ago. Her opinion ceased to matter the moment I realized it was never based on truth. She was looking at me through a lens distorted by hatred, and no achievement of mine could ever correct that distortion. My validation comes from other sources now. The Maya Richardson Foundation for Educational Equity launched 5 years ago, funded initially by my own savings, and later by grants and donations from people who believed in our mission. We provide legal resources for students facing discrimination, scholarships for those whose academic records were damaged by biased educators, and advocacy training for parents navigating hostile school systems. Last year alone, we intervened in 47 cases across the country. 47 students whose stories echoed my own, bright young people being systematically undermined by teachers who couldn't see past their skin color. We didn't win every case, but we won enough to matter, enough to change trajectories, enough to remind institutions that someone was watching. Jennifer Holloway, yes, the same Jennifer who testified at my hearing, serves on our board of directors. She became a civil rights attorney, inspired, she says, by what she witnessed that day in the library. We've remained close friends all these years, bound by a moment of shared courage that changed both our lives. You gave me permission to be brave, she told me at our last board meeting. I'd been so comfortable in my privilege that I didn't even see it. You opened my eyes. Marcus Chen is now a federal judge in California. Destiny Williams runs a nonprofit providing college counseling to first-generation students. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo retired from Duke last year but still calls me regularly, checking in, offering wisdom, reminding me of how far we've come. We're all connected now, a network of survivors who became advocates, victims who became victors, Students who refuse to let one teacher's hatred define their destinies. My mother passed away 3 years ago, peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family. At her funeral, I spoke about everything she'd taught me. The importance of documentation, yes, but more than that. The importance of believing in yourself when no one else does. The importance of standing up when sitting down would be easier. The importance of fighting for future generations even when you won't be there to see them thrive. She told me once that education is the one thing they can't take from you, I said, standing before a church filled with people who'd loved her. She was right about that, but she gave me something even more valuable. She gave me the understanding that I was worthy of that education, that I belonged in any room I entered, that no one's prejudice could diminish my light unless I let it. I carry her with me every day, in the garden I tend on weekends, in the gumbo I make from her mother's recipe, in the way I advocate for patients who can't advocate for themselves. My father is still in the yellow house on Cypress Street, tending the garden that was my mother's pride, surrounded by grandchildren from my brothers and photos of all of us covering every surface. I visit him every Thanksgiving, sitting on the same porch where I once planned my assault on Jefferson Davis High School. "You proud of me, Daddy?" I asked him last year, half joking. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Baby girl, I was proud of you the day you were born. Everything since then has just been confirmation." Last month, I received a letter that brought everything full circle. It was from a young girl in Mississippi, a 16-year-old named Destiny, who reminded me so much of myself, it was almost painful. She'd found my story online while researching what to do about a teacher who was failing her despite her obvious capabilities. "Dear Dr. Richardson," she wrote, "I thought I was alone until I read about what happened to you. I thought I was going crazy, that maybe I really was as dumb as she made me feel. But your story showed me the truth. It's not me. It was never me. And now I know what to do." She'd started documenting everything. She'd found allies among her classmates. She'd told her parents, who'd contacted our foundation. Her hearing is scheduled for next month. I'm planning to attend. Because that's what we do now. We show up for each other. We testify. We bear witness. We refuse to let another generation suffer in silence. The legend Mrs. Patterson tried to prevent me from becoming. It was never about fame or recognition or proving her wrong. It was about this web of connection and support and shared struggle. This community of survivors who lift each other up. This legacy that will outlast all of us. Mrs. Alina Patterson wanted to destroy one student. Instead, she ignited a movement. That's the thing about trying to dim someone's light. Sometimes, all you do is create a spark that sets the whole world on fire. As I sit here now, in this office I earned through years of sacrifice and struggle, I sometimes think about that girl standing in the hallway with a report card that burned in her hands. She was so scared, so confused, so convinced that her dreams were dying right there on that cold linoleum floor. I wish I could go back and tell her what I know now. That the F on that report card was never about her. That the teacher who gave it was fighting battles Maya couldn't see, battles against her own inadequacy, her own fear, her own small and shriveled heart. That the fire meant to consume her would forge her instead. That 15 years later, she would be saving children's lives with the hands that once trembled holding that red-marked card. That she would become a legend, not despite what Mrs. Patterson did, but in some ways because of it. If you're watching this and you see yourself in my story, if you're the student being failed unfairly, or the employee being undermined, or the person being told you don't belong, I need you to hear me. Their grades do not determine your worth. Their opinions do not define your ceiling. Their hatred is a reflection of their limitation, not yours. You are capable of more than they will ever understand. And someday, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but someday, you will stand where they said you could never stand, and you will know that their verdict was never final. Document everything. Find your allies, speak your truth, and never ever let them steal your light. So I ask you now, what limitations have others placed on you? What dreams have they tried to kill? And what are you going to build from the ashes of their doubt? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, because your story matters, not just to you, but to everyone who needs to know they're not alone. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who's struggling right now, someone who needs to be reminded that their chapter isn't over. Because it's not. The story they're trying to tell about you is not the story that has to be written. Pick up the pen, write your own ending, become the legend they said you could never be. Until next time, this is Auntie Me reminding you. They can fail you on paper, but they can never fail your spirit. Stay strong, stay documented, and never stop rising. The end.